The truth is, you can teach an old dog new tricks.
Hey!
Oh, Bob. Well,
I've been in this business for quite some time, and this is a whole new approach for me, and it's a very successful one.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
In the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, a lot of communities turned and looked at each other and said, would we be doing any better if there were an emergency in our neighborhood? Here's a community that has said yes, and they're taking the ball and rolling with it. I'm with Bob Hamlin, who's with the County Department of Emergency Management, Jefferson County in Washington State, and Deb Stinson, who's with citizens who are working on community preparedness. She's a co-coordinator. Thank you both for joining me for this conversation. Deb, sure. What I understand is that you and the citizens, representing the citizens, came forward to your Department of Emergency Management yourselves with an initiative. What happened there?
Well, what happened was, as I'm sure everybody remembers, is Katrina, as you mentioned. And we had a large contingent of people here in town who took it on their own to put together a process to go down and help people in Bay St. Louis, Missouri. And there were a lot of people in town that got to see the very harsh reality of the aftermath of that devastating storm. And so they came home, and this, of course, was top of mind. Well, about the same time, there was another movement happening in town all around sustainability. And how do we promote sustainability in our own community? And so we're looking at these two things kind of side by side, and we realized there was some pretty natural overlap there, because sustainability is about really maximizing what it is we have and making sure we keep the wonderful community that we have, but also being resilient in the face of change, no matter what that change is. And Katrina was definitely one of those immediate changes. Sure. And we face earthquakes and other types of events here that we don't get the warning that you get with a hurricane. So we decided we should be looking at emergency preparedness. So that was one of the main things we were looking at within the larger sustainability picture, along with water and energy and transportation and other important issues. But it became pretty evident early on that really a good foundation for sustainability is strong neighborhoods. And as you know, neighborhoods are something we've kind of lost over the years with our garage doors and our televisions and our computers and things of that nature.
And our separate houses and not the front porch.
And our individualism, and we've kind of lost that neighborhood connection. And so we thought we'd really like to strengthen our neighborhoods. And then we got to looking at emergency preparedness again and saying, you know, that is such a natural place for people to come together.
Sure.
It's common ground. It cuts across all the political boundaries that we put around ourselves, and it's a good place to maybe bridge that divide and find that common ground. So we thought, good place to start. We're helping each other prepare. And so one of our mottos, one of the ways we work in this group we call Local 2020, is to not recreate the wheel, but to look around, map the assets that we already have in our community and find out how can we build on those. And that's when we said, well, we have this Department of Emergency Management. Let's go out and talk to them about what they're already doing and find out what we can do to help. And so that's when we found Bob. And he was very receptive, threw his door wide open.
Hey.
And we started this great partnership. So maybe he can talk a little bit about what he thought about our approach.
In emergency management, we all have milestones and things that we remember that stimulate our planning and that sort of activity. And Katrina and September 11th were two significant milestones for us. I've been in the business quite some time, about 40 years. And we try desperately to send the message of preparedness, and don't necessarily always successful. I've got a couple of nicknames. One, they call me Chicken Little. The sky is falling, or Dr. Doom. And so it's just one of those messages when I when I go to meet with my board of commissioners, oh, Bob's here. What's wrong today? And so when 2020 came in, we struggled with Katrina. We sent a lot of people down there from this community. And a lot of them had life-changing events, life-changing incidents with that. And so we struggled. How can we use this? And I don't mean to be disrespectful to the tragedy in Katrina, but how can we use this to get our message across?
Because often it is a hardship, a catastrophe, a disaster, something that causes any of us to wake up and pay attention.
It's a sad truth that there's nothing better for disaster preparedness than a disaster. And it is a tragic, sad truth, and it's the business that we're in. So 2020 came to the door, and frankly, I'm a neophyte. I did not understand. They were articulate, they had a great idea, but I'm a responder, and I don't understand that side of things. I'm a big picture kind of person, and I didn't understand sustainability and community. I know what they do, and I know what they are to our community, but I couldn't get the nexus. So they had to beat me up a little bit.
You just had to just do some I bet, just some communicating.
That's
Exactly.
right. Yeah.
Exactly what it was.
Right.
Exactly.
But then I began to understand what it was, what the nexus was, and we began to realize that we had a opportunity for a partnership that was quite unique. And I know I've discussed this a lot of times with my peers in other places, and they fully appreciate the uniqueness of the partnership because it meets their standard, their objective of sustainability, but it meets my objective of the message. So we've gone from just the discussions to actually implementing a preparedness level within the community that, with the kind of resources I have, is not achievable without this kind of partnership. Just not achievable.
So, if I understand right, the kind of work that your community you're doing is reaching to the neighborhoods and to people.
Right, exactly. So what we came in here, we saw this wonderful facility. We met all the great people. We saw his extended team. Bob is a great partner. He partners with a lot of people, the Red Cross, the sheriff, the police, the Coast Guard, very large group. That's another great thing he has going on a bi-monthly basis where he's invited the neighborhoods now to participate with that larger community of partners. We sit at that table now as well. But what we discovered, though, with Bob, he had one really fine gentleman, Dennis Crawford, who was working here at the time as a community outreach person. It was one guy. It's a very large community geographically. And he had some neighborhoods going at the time. And so we said, well, how can we help you get more of these neighborhoods? And he said, I need help doing the outreach. And how do we organize people? We're like, community organization?
We'll
we
sign
do
up
that.
for that one.
We'll do that.
Okay, so what did you do on the ground?
Well, what we did is we put our heads together with Bob and Dennis, and we said, let's just get started with some basic education and make sure people are aware of what resources Bob and his peers bring to bear. Okay. So we advertised some meetings in the paper and sent out flyers, you know, the typical thing. Got a lot of people to come to meetings. We did 2 in one day. We did a daytime and a nighttime, so we could reach as many as possible. And then we brought in Bob and Dennis from the EOC here. We brought in the first responders from the fire and the police and the Red Cross and the EMTs.
Emergency?
The emergency medical teams.
Okay.
And each one of them got up and said what they do and don't do. And the message was quite clear that in a broad disaster, the definition of a disaster is that something has occurred that exceeds the capability of the first responders. And therefore...
We adopted the you're on your own
right,
model.
you're on your own. We did the yo-yo.
You're on your own. Okay.
You're on your own, yo-yo. And that was very effective. People, you know, we didn't do it as a scare tactic. We just said, if something were to happen, let's all be educated so we understand to have realistic expectations from our first responders, because there's only so much they can do, and they have a hierarchy or their own set of priorities that Bob can speak to in a minute. But we need to understand that so that we can be step up to our own power, take responsibility for ourselves, and figure out how we can do that best both for our individuals, our households, and then our neighborhoods.
You know, there's a, excuse me, a couple of important elements to this that I think are really important to understand the background. We're a small community, and as a small community, we're resource poor. We're sort of the end of the road. If you look at us geographically, we'll share. We have no distribution centers.
You're a peninsula. I should say Port Townsend being at the tip, and so you're
Literally
in
the end
that
of the
peninsula.
road in that
Yeah,
respect.
yeah.
And we don't have a distribution centers. We don't have warehousing. We don't have a railroad. We're at the end of the road. So when there is a regional emergency that would impact the Puget Sound area, for instance, we're going to be competing for resources with 1.5 million population at some other location.
Seattle and so on.
Right.
You're at the periphery.
So as resource poor, we're sort of on our own, literally on our own from a government perspective, from a first responder perspective, as well as assistance from the outside. So their partnership, that's where my education, I started to learn from that. I realized that their partnership is going to be a force multiplier, if you would.
A force
to the
multiplier.
to what I can do. Dennis is a fine man and a single person with a huge task, and they were able to make him into several people. We were able to expand very quickly. So it was a learning process, and it still is a learning process to me. But now there's something else that's happening, and it's just fairly recently that we've really come to this reality. They now are a partner at the table of responders. It used to be a kind of a we-they thing. Oh, that's very nice, and have a nice day. Let me know how it works out. And then when I would get to a meeting, so, well, we have X number of hundred neighborhoods, sort of taking the credit for it. And I realized the neighborhoods need to be to understand the responders. Our responder community is very diverse because we do have a lot of federal lands. We have a number of, our responders make up local, state, and federal emergency responders. There was an element missing. And it took me a while to really grasp that the neighborhood needs to be part of that element. And in addition to the neighborhood, we found out through our partnership with them a real good connection to our vulnerable populations, because we have we have a lot of elderly people in this community, including myself. In the state of Washington, this county has the largest percentage of persons over 65 of any of the counties in the state of Washington. So that's a demographic that needs to be focused on. We have a number of vulnerable people who have disabilities that needs to be a focus. They were able to focus on that element that I did not have the resources to focus on. So they're now all at the table. The animal welfare group, disaster welfare.
Right.
They call themselves Disaster Animal Welfare Group DOG.
Cute,
with a W.
cute. Yeah, because I remember the animals after Katrina. It was like,
there was
what
a Katrina lesson,
Sure.
and that's a significant part of it. So the problem that I have with all of this is not this tremendous outpouring of assistance, things that people want to do. It's having a big enough room to put them all in.
what a sad problem. It's the kind of problem you want, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got your community involved, working as a team. I love that sense of partnership that you're having. I have a question. It's like, once you did, you said you started with some educating of folks.
Right.
Where did it go from there?
Very simple. We're very low tech, and it works very well here. We had a map of the city and a map of the county, and at that point we just had little push pins with
Started
little
drawing on
sticky
the
note,
map.
and we just started dropping out, where do you live? Would you organize your neighborhood? What boundaries do you want? And we started assigning numbers and people stepping up. And we didn't have a formal program at that time. And so what we did to help entice people, is those of us on the committee, sat along with Dennis's help and Bob, came up with what we called a toolkit. And it was
Aha.
like, here's a letter you can send to your neighbors. You know, we had to kind of teach people.
Sure.
We had to facilitate that leadership. It's a hard thing.
People are not used to doing that.
That's right. It's a
And
new skill.
Certainly, if you give them the tools to help just organize their neighborhood, it's going to
Right.
take the hurdles down.
Right.
We
and
did discover, though, the reality of this effort. It was cyclical. There was the post-Katrina peak. A number of communities emerged and took that project on. And then it began to wane just a bit, and then some stimulation had to occur, and then we had to do some little changes of strategy. I think we're probably going to go through that several times again. I've seen it over the years, and so I'm not disappointed with the fact that some will come and go. But just recently, 9 or 10 new neighborhoods as a result of the little outreach project that they had, and that's pretty.
That's
unique.
that's pretty cool.
Right,
When somebody organizes their neighborhood, says, yes, I will take this region, then what do they do? Take me through the steps, because if somebody wants to do what you guys are doing, they're going to want to know,
Sure.
what am I in for?
Right. Well, you know, if somebody outside the state of Washington is watching this, we put up on the website this little toolkit that we developed, and they're welcome to download it. And it's very simple.
Give me the website.
L2020.org/EP.
EP, Emergency Preparedness.
Yeah,
Okay.
Emergency
Okay,
Preparedness.
Thank
So
you.
they'll see a download center there, and there's all kinds of materials. And the toolkit that we developed is still up there for that purpose. And it just gives some good, how do you know, here's your welcome letter. When you have the meeting, here's some ideas about how to run the meeting. Or maybe you start with a potluck, keep it social, keep it light. Just suggestions on how to move forward and the type of information they would want to collect and all that. We'd gone down that path and we're fairly successful with it, and about that time there was a woman here in the state of Washington who works at the state level who developed a really wonderful program called the Map Your Neighborhood.
Map your neighborhood. Okay.
MYN.
all right. Okay.
And that we have links to that website from our website as well. And it's a very sophisticated tool of what we were trying to accomplish, but it's a very nice packet that we can offer people now. That it even has the little information packet that you share with each household, where you share everybody, you get everybody's contact information, who has what tools, who has what skills, who has what needs. You pre-establish where you're going to meet after a disaster, who's going to have the care home, who's going to be doing what.
And so in that mapping, are people, I want you to give a little more specifics on that. Are people mapping, do you have emergency water storage? I mean, those
Right.
kinds of things, so that if,
You know,
or
it really
food
stimulates the whole
or-
discussion.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I would
It does.
imagine.
Yeah.
And there was actually, kind of back up just a little bit, at the same time we were doing this neighborhood organizing, we had a woman in the community who has experience as being search and rescue. She comes from Florida, very familiar with, yeah. And so she had put together a very comprehensive program to help individuals and households become prepared. And she had a very creative system where once a month you come together for an hour. And at the beginning of the hour, she covers a disaster. Like, what does an earthquake mean? What's a tornado? What do you do in this situation, that situation? And then the remainder of the hour was one topic. How do you get your financial records in order? Okay, and then you have a month to work on that. And then what do you do about water? Then you have a month to
And
work
then
on that.
I
And then
see.
what do you do about food? And very well thought out. And so a lot of we offered that to the people that were doing neighborhoods. Some attended as neighborhoods. She's made the course available online. Again, linked to off of our site. It's getemergencyprepared.com.
Getemergencyprepared.com.
All one
Okay.
word.
Wonderful.
And it's something that neighborhoods were able to, if they wanted to continue meeting, they could do that same monthly meeting.
I can imagine that having a set time and a set topic, and somebody's already worked out all the details. Again, you've lowered the barriers, and it also gives you an excuse. And it's almost like you need a deadline to just do the work.
It is.
There's an important issue, though, and I think it's one of the successes. There is no specific formula, and that's one of the failures that maybe we did before we tried this project. We tried to formulate that a little bit. And some of these neighborhood organizations are very formal, They even have, captains and identified locations
Drills.
and it's rather
Practice
drills
drills,
and
okay.
communication
Yeah,
systems, and it's rather spectacular stuff, and somewhat fun to watch. As a matter of fact, that enthusiasm is overwhelming, and some of them are based on a yearly potluck, where they close the street and
Have a good
have a
time.
potluck.
Yeah.
So it's not a formula. It's not a rigid formula. So Map Your Neighborhood is just a guide to help you have the discussion. But a part, and this is a real important, another lesson for me. I'm the doom and gloom, you're going to die, be afraid, be very afraid kind of a person. That's the nature of this business.
That's why you're in this
That's the
business,
nature
and
of this
you
business.
need to, because that's part of doing the job well.
True. But we had a meeting not too long ago where the discussion was, how can we make a positive out of a negative? How can we make it look different than Bob's be very afraid, be very, very afraid? And we looked at a lot of different positive approaches to it, and we adopted, as a partnership, we adopted a slogan, and I hope I get this right, because I want to make sure it was self-reliance, community resilience. What it means is the individuals that are reliant on themselves, because it's a you're-on-your-own scenario, makes an overall resilience to the community. That's the buzzword at the federal level now, is resilience, the ability to quickly and efficiently recover to some state of normalcy following a major emergency. So this self-reliance, community resilience is a real positive message.
Yes.
It's a lot better than be afraid, be very afraid. And that's another one of those lessons that we've learned.
Because one of the things that happens is when you hear all the bad news, of course, we tend to either deny or blanket out because we can't deal with all of it. The other is that you start to see with a phrase like self-reliance, community resilience, you start to see the benefits for yourself in terms of security, feeling less vulnerable, not feeling powerless. But the other thing that I expect, I'm guessing comes out of this, is that you realize that you may or may not be able to take care of yourself entirely. And really the compassion thing is also to make sure that your elderly neighbor has somebody that has the key to her back door in case, to help her out. And then you build the kind of social network, the social true security that has been superseded by our isolation.
So it comes back to that initial point that we were talking about earlier, about wanting to foster strong neighborhoods, right? And really start rebuilding community at that very basic level. And what we're seeing is, as Bob likes to talk out, we've kind of started a movement. People can, Dennis even mentioned in his neighborhood, once he got his neighborhood organized, before he'd go walk his dog and he'd come home and it'd be pretty quick. And now he has to plan much longer outing because he sees so many people and talks to so many people. It takes much longer now because everybody knows everybody and they're concerned and they want to stay in touch.
They're building neighborliness.
They're building neighborliness.
Fabulous.
We've had some of our neighborhoods have started community gardens because they got to know each other. We're a town of foodies, and plus we are at the end of the road. We realize that we won't have a lot of resources, so it is a sense of security to have your own food, and we're talking about the whole self-reliance and community resilience is about any kind of situation. So it could be a power outage of 3 days. It could be the bridge going down for 3 months. It could be an earthquake. It could be a big snowstorm, whatever. But everything we're doing fosters that strong neighborhood, so we know that we can take care of ourselves and we can take care of our neighbors, or vice versa.
We have about 3 minutes left, so I
Okay.
want to make sure that any last thoughts. But would you give the website again so people can go find the tools you're talking about?
Sure.
And then any last thoughts?
Okay, the website is l2020.org.
Okay.
Very
And
simple.
there's-
/EP. Right. Or if you just go to the homepage, you'll see emergency preparedness on the
Okay.
left, and you can click on that.
And just go digging around.
That's
in
right.
there.
That's
Good.
right, yeah.
Last thoughts.
The truth is, you can teach an old dog new tricks.
Hey!
Oh, Bob. Well,
I've been in this business for quite some time, and this is a whole new approach for me, and it's a very successful one. One of the things that she didn't talk about was incredible communications system that they've developed. I can put out information to the community. It immediately goes multiple paths into the community and is very, saturation is achieved. Not possible without this kind of partnership.
Is it through email or listservs or that
Right
kind of
now,
thing?
that's how it's done.
I
yeah.
mean, let's use it.
It's a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, it is.
Every level you can.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, we even use text messaging now.
Sure.
I find that to be
That's okay, but it's current, and that's where, how
Well,
you're going to
Yeah.
reach some of your
And that's a
population.
lesson from Bay St. Louis. They had no cell phone, no telephone, no email, but text messages could get through.
Yep.
So it's something it's worth learning.
So we have
so-
low-tech methods, which is neighbor to neighbor, and we have high-tech methods, which is text messaging. And
If the
it's
net
pretty
stays
effective.
up, so it's like that's part
Yep.
of your planning. It's like
Yeah.
whatever level of emergency you work with, what means you have.
Sure.
That's right. That's right. And the thing I would like to make sure we touch on is the real power of the partnership, and that the fact that concerned citizens can feel empowered, they can take responsibility for themselves, and they can approach their government officials and work with them in a very effective way. That not to be afraid, there were people, honestly, when we started this saying, oh, you can't, we just have to figure this out. They won't want to talk to us. And they wouldn't even want to make the attempt because that's them and that's us. And so we need to get away from the them and the us and realize government is us and we're all in this together. And we need to work together, and we need to quit laying blame. It's not anybody's fault. We need to take responsibility for ourselves, and it's working beautifully.
I would commend, and I would think that the viewers would know that there's been a genuine, dedicated effort on the part of all the parties to really persevere and find where that common ground is.
Yes.
And so your perseverance to just keep communicating, to keep trying to teach that old dog the new tricks, pays off.
That's right.
And is paying off. And I salute you for all of you.
Well, we've learned an awful lot from Bob and his team, too. They're just amazing what they can pull off here with our limited resources. So.
Well, the objective, reduction of human suffering, and that's if it can be done by partnership, that's and to everyone's advantage. So.
Definitely.
You're going to be a community that's more ready than most. Thank you.
That's our goal. Thank you.
Yes. You're watching Peak Moment, local reliance for challenging times, and this community in Port Townsend and Jefferson County is working on their local reliance in a really positive way. Join us next time.